The evening rush hour in the busy downtown subway was something to behold. Hundreds of tired people squeezed into the metal tube, all hoping to get home after a long day of work. The air was thick with the smell of perfume, coffee, and the city itself. Lights flickered overhead as the train rocked back and forth on the tracks. Among the crowd stood a small, white-haired woman named Martha. At 78 years old, she still took the subway 3 times a week to visit her sister in the next borough. Today, she wore her favorite blue coat with the flower pin, despite the warm weather. Her hands, spotted with age and slightly shaky, held tightly to a worn brown handbag. That bag meant everything to her. Inside was a gold locket with a photo of her husband Tom, who had passed away 5 years ago. She talked to that picture sometimes when she felt lonely. There was also her weekly pension money, not much, but enough to buy groceries, and maybe a small treat for her sister's grandkids. And tucked in the side pocket was a small book of prayers that had belonged to her mother. The pages were yellow and soft from years of turning. Martha stood near the door, holding the silver pole with one hand and her precious bag with the other. She watched the stops go by, counting 4 more until she needed to get off. 3 cars down, a very different passenger sat quietly, trying not to be noticed. Jason Statham, the famous action movie star, wore a plain baseball cap, pulled low and dark sunglasses, even though he was underground. He'd turned down his usual driver today, wanting to see how regular people lived in the city. His next movie role was as an everyday man who gets caught up in something bigger than himself, and Jason always did his homework. Got to understand how it feels, he thought, watching the mix of people around him. Can't fake this kind of experience. His trained eyes noticed everything. The teenager bobbing his head to music, the tired nurse in scrubs staring blankly at her phone, the businessman trying not to wrinkle his suit as people pressed against him. Jason had fought bad guys in movies for years, but in real life he was just observing, soaking in the energy of the crowded car. The subway screeched to a halt at the next stop. The doors slid open with a ding, and more people pushed their way in. Among them was a thin man wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm weather. He was around 30, with sharp features and eyes that never stopped moving. A small scar ran across his left eyebrow, and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets. The thin man stepped into the car and immediately began scanning the crowd. His eyes jumped from person to person, not looking at faces but at bags, pockets, jewelry. He was hunting. His gaze stopped when he spotted Martha. An easy target. Old, small, distracted by the map above the door. The thin man's mouth twitched slightly, not quite a smile, but close. He began moving through the packed car toward her, sliding between passengers with practiced ease. "Excuse me," he mumbled when someone glared at him, "just trying to get to the door." Jason Statham noticed the man right away. Something about how he moved through the crowd seemed off. Most people on the subway tried to avoid touching others, but this guy was different, purposeful, focused. Jason straightened slightly in his seat, his relaxed posture changing as his instincts kicked in. The subway car lurched forward, throwing some passengers off balance. The thin man used this moment to move even closer to Martha, now just a few feet away. His hand slipped out of his pocket ready. And all the while, neither Martha nor the thin man realized that one of the world's most famous action heroes was watching every move, his eyes narrowing behind dark glasses as the scene began to unfold. The thin man's name was Ray, and life hadn't been kind to him lately. 6 months behind on rent with an empty fridge at home, he was running out of options. His landlord had given him the final warning yesterday: pay up by Friday or find somewhere else to live. But that wasn't even the worst of his problems. He owed money to some rough guys who worked for a loan shark down in the Bronx, and they weren't the type to accept excuses or late payments. Ray's hands trembled slightly as he thought about their last visit. They hadn't hurt him, not badly anyway, but the message was clear. 3 more days, that's all he had. His eyes darted around the subway car with growing desperation. He needed money today. Just one good score, he thought, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Just enough to buy some time. Ray wasn't always like this. There had been a time when he worked as a night guard at a warehouse. Decent pay, honest work. Then came the layoffs and the drinking and the gambling, trying to make quick money when the jobs dried up. One bad choice led to another, and now here he was, scanning a subway car for someone to rob. His eyes settled on Martha again. She looked kind, the type of lady who would bake cookies for neighborhood kids. Her coat was old but well kept, and that handbag, though worn around the edges, looked full. Ray had learned from experience that older folks often carried cash instead of cards. They didn't trust banks or couldn't figure out ATMs. Either way, it usually meant money in their bags. Ray watched as Martha adjusted her glasses to look at the subway map. Her fingers were covered with simple gold rings, wedding band, and maybe a mother's ring. Nothing flashy, but gold was gold. He felt a twinge of shame, quickly pushed aside by desperation. She probably has family to help her, he told himself. I've got nobody. Ray had done this before. Elderly targets rarely chased after you. They seldom fought back. Usually, they were too shocked to even yell until you were already gone. It wasn't something he was proud of, but he had rules: never hurt anyone, just grab and run. As he moved closer to Martha, Ray didn't bother looking at the other passengers anymore. Most people on the subway kept their heads down, pretended not to see anything happening around them. New Yorkers minded their own business. That's what made the city perfect for what he did. What Ray didn't realize was that the muscular man in the baseball cap and sunglasses wasn't a typical New Yorker. Jason Statham had spent years training to be aware of his surroundings, both for movie roles and for real-life security. Nothing escaped his notice, especially not someone with the distinctive body language of a predator stalking prey. Jason watched as Ray inched closer to Martha. The actor's jaw tightened, muscles tensing under his plain black t-shirt. In his movies, this would be the moment the hero notices the bad guy and prepares for action. But this wasn't a movie set with stunt coordinators and safety mats. This was real life with real consequences. Martha remained oblivious to what was happening. She was thinking about her sister, who wasn't feeling well lately. She had baked a banana bread this morning to bring over. It was wrapped in foil in her bag, still warm. She couldn't wait to see her sister's face light up at the treat. The train announcer called out the next stop. People began shifting, preparing to exit or make room for new passengers. Ray used this moment of movement to get even closer to Martha. Now he was right behind her, close enough to smell the light lavender perfume she wore. His heart hammered in his chest. Jason Statham rose slightly from his seat, keeping his eyes fixed on Ray. The train began to slow as it approached the station, wheels screeching against the tracks. Ray steadied himself against the pole, one hand moving toward the outside pocket of his hoodie. The subway car jerked as it came to a stop. It was time. Ray made his decision. As the doors prepared to open with their familiar ding, he positioned himself directly behind Martha, ready to make his move in the confusion of people exiting. The subway doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. The platform was crowded with waiting passengers eager to board. This was the moment Ray had been waiting for, that perfect window of confusion when everyone was focused on getting in or out. Ray took a deep breath and bumped into Martha, hard enough to throw her slightly off balance, but not enough to knock her down. He'd done this dozens of times before. The secret was to make it look like an accident. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. His words were kind, but his hands were quick. In that brief moment of contact, Ray's fingers worked with the skill of a magician. He slipped the handbag off Martha's arm while steadying her with his other hand. Most people never even realized what was happening until it was too late. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. "No problem at all," Martha started to say, not yet aware of what had happened. Ray was already turning away, the bag tucked against his side, partially hidden by his hoodie. His heart pounded in his ears as he moved toward the open doors. Just a few more steps and he'd be on the platform, then up the stairs, then gone into the crowds of the city. No one ever caught him. No one ever cared enough to try. Martha felt something wrong before she understood what it was. There was a sudden lightness on her shoulder, an absence where the familiar weight of her bag should be. Her hand reached up automatically, touching nothing but the fabric of her coat. The realization hit her like a splash of cold water. Her bag was gone. Everything was gone. "My bag," she cried out, her voice trembling. "Please, my bag, it's all I have." Her words seemed small in the noisy station. A few people glanced her way, but most kept their eyes down, pretending not to hear. A young woman with headphones gave her a sympathetic look, but then turned away. An older man shook his head sadly but stayed put. "Someone took my bag," Martha said again, louder this time, tears welling in her eyes. She pointed shakily toward Ray's retreating figure. Him, in the dark hoodie. But Ray was already stepping onto the platform, merging with the crowd. In his mind, he was already counting the money he might find, wondering if the rings he'd spotted were real gold or just costume jewelry. What Ray didn't count on was what happened next. Jason Statham had seen everything. Unlike the other passengers, he wasn't frozen by indifference or the bystander effect. He'd spent his career playing heroes who stepped up when others wouldn't, and something of those characters had become part of who he was. In one fluid motion, Jason stood up from his seat. He removed his sunglasses, revealing intense eyes focused entirely on Ray's back. People who recognized him gasped. A few even took out their phones, but Jason paid them no attention. "Stay here," he said to Martha, his voice deep and reassuring as he passed her. "I'll get your bag back." There was no hesitation in his steps, no doubt in his mind about what he was going to do. The subway car was still disgorging passengers, creating a human obstacle course between him and the thief. Jason moved through them with the same precision he brought to his movie stunts, sliding sideways between a businessman and a teenager, stepping quickly around a mother with a stroller. Ray had no idea what was coming. As far as he knew, he pulled off another easy job. He moved quickly along the platform, head down, the stolen bag now tucked under his arm. He was already planning his escape route, up the north stairs, through the turnstiles, then down 42nd Street where he could disappear into the crowds. Behind him, Jason reached the subway doors just before they started to close. He pushed through onto the platform, his eyes never leaving the dark hoodie that was now about 30 feet ahead of him. The gap was closing. A subway security guard noticed the commotion and started to move toward them, but he was too far away to make a difference. This was between Jason and Ray now, the action star and the thief who had chosen the wrong subway car on the wrong day. Ray pushed his way through the crowded platform, muttering "excuse me" and "sorry" as he bumped past people. He wasn't running. Running would draw attention. Instead, he walked quickly with purpose, like someone late for an important meeting. The stolen bag was now tucked under his arm, partially hidden by his hoodie. The station was packed with the evening rush hour crowd. Office workers heading home, students with backpacks, tourists consulting maps on their phones. Ray used them all as cover, weaving between groups, changing direction slightly when he spotted security cameras overhead. He'd done this many times before. The key was to blend in and keep moving. What Ray didn't know was that Jason Statham was right behind him, closing the distance with each step. Unlike Ray, Jason didn't need to be careful about drawing attention. His focus was singular: catch the thief, get the bag back. Years of filming chase scenes had made him efficient at moving through crowds. He slipped between people like water flowing around rocks, never losing sight of the dark hoodie ahead. A group of chatting teenagers blocked Ray's path. He sidestepped them, accidentally stepping on someone's foot. "Hey, watch it," a man in a business suit snapped. Ray mumbled an apology but kept moving. The north exit was just ahead. A straight shot to the escalators, then the street. His fingers itched to open the bag and see what he'd scored, but he knew better. Never check the goods until you're safe. 20 feet behind, Jason was gaining ground. His athletic training gave him an advantage in this human obstacle course. When someone stepped in his way, he simply placed a gentle hand on their shoulder and guided them aside. Most people were so startled by the sudden appearance of a movie star that they moved without thinking. "Is that?" a woman began, recognizing him. "Jason Statham," her friend finished, pulling out her phone. Jason didn't break stride. "Police business," he said firmly, though he had no official authority. Something about his confidence made people believe him. Ray reached the escalator and hopped on, taking the steps two at a time as he climbed. Freedom was just above, the busy street where he could disappear into a taxi or down into another subway entrance. His breathing was getting heavier now, adrenaline pumping through his system. At the top of the escalator, Ray glanced back for the first time. His heart nearly stopped. There, just stepping onto the escalator below, was a face he recognized immediately. Everyone would recognize that face. The hard jawline, the intense eyes, the muscular build that couldn't be hidden under casual clothes. "No way," Ray whispered. "No freaking way." It was impossible. Why would Jason Statham, the famous action movie star, be chasing him? Ray blinked hard, thinking his mind was playing tricks. But when he looked again, the actor was still there, steadily climbing the escalator, eyes locked on Ray like a missile tracking its target. Panic kicked in. Ray abandoned all pretense of being casual and broke into a run as he reached the top. He pushed past an elderly man, nearly knocking him down. The exit turnstiles were just ahead. He fumbled for his Metro card, slapped it against the reader, and pushed through. Behind him, Jason vaulted over a turnstile in one smooth motion, earning gasps from onlookers and a shout from a transit worker. But he didn't slow down. If anything, the knowledge that Ray had spotted him made Jason quicken his pace. The game was changing now. The thief knew he was being chased, which made him more dangerous and unpredictable. Ray burst out onto the street, the bright evening sun momentarily blinding him after the dim station. Horns honked, people bustled past on the sidewalk, food vendors called out their specials. The normal chaos of the city, he spun around, looking for an escape route. To his left, a crowded sidewalk leading toward Times Square. To his right, construction blocking half the walkway. Straight ahead, the entrance to a shopping center. Behind him, Jason Statham emerging from the subway entrance, scanning the crowd. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Ray clutched Martha's bag tighter and made his choice. He sprinted toward the shopping center doors, shoving aside a couple taking selfies. Jason was right behind him, moving with the determined grace of a predator chasing down its prey. The shopping center doors swung shut behind Ray as he sprinted through the entrance. It was one of those mid-level malls with shiny floors and too much perfume in the air. Shoppers turned to stare as he raced past storefronts, nearly knocking over a display of sunglasses. Security cameras swiveled to follow his movement, not that he noticed or cared at this point. All Ray could think about was getting away from the man chasing him. His lungs burned and sweat ran down his back. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. It was supposed to be a simple grab, take the old lady's bag and disappear. Nobody was supposed to follow him, especially not some Hollywood action hero. Ray spotted a staff-only door near the back of the food court and made a split-second decision. He yanked it open and found himself in a service corridor. Plain concrete walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and blessed emptiness. No people, no witnesses. He slammed the door behind him and leaned against it, gasping for breath. "I lost him," Ray wheezed, allowing himself a moment of relief. No way he saw which door I took. He looked down at Martha's bag still clutched in his hand. Now was his chance to check what he'd scored. Ray unzipped it with shaking fingers and peered inside. There was a worn leather wallet that looked promising, a small book with a cross on it, some tissues, a plastic container that smelled like banana bread, and, his heart sank, a small gold locket. Not much of a haul. Definitely not worth being chased by Jason Statham. Ray was digging through the wallet when the service door burst open with such force that it slammed him forward onto his knees. The bag and its contents scattered across the floor. Jason Statham stood in the doorway, not even breathing hard. His baseball cap was gone, probably lost in the chase, and his eyes were laser-focused on Ray. "I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you," Jason said, his voice surprisingly calm. That famous gravelly accent was unmistakable, even more intimidating in person than in movies. Ray scrambled backward on the floor, eyes wide. "Look, man, I don't want trouble. Take the bag. It's right there." He pointed to Martha's belongings now spread across the concrete. Jason took a step forward. "You should have thought about not wanting trouble before you robbed an elderly woman." Ray's hand moved to his pocket, fingers wrapping around the small knife he carried. Not a serious weapon, just a folding knife he used to cut open boxes at his last legitimate job. He never wanted to use it on a person, never thought he'd have to. But trapped in a corridor with an angry action star, what choice did he have? "Stay back," Ray warned, pulling out the knife with a trembling hand. The blade clicked open, catching the harsh overhead light. "I'm serious. I'll use this." Jason stopped walking, but there wasn't a trace of fear on his face. Instead, he looked almost disappointed. He shook his head slowly. Big mistake, he said calmly, shifting his weight to the balls of his feet. What followed wasn't like the fight scenes from Jason's movies. There were no spectacular kicks or flips or bodies crushing through walls. Real violence is quicker, uglier, and more efficient. When Ray lunged forward with the knife, Jason simply stepped aside. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Ray's wrist, twisted it sharply, and applied pressure to exactly the right spot. The knife clattered to the ground as Ray yelped in pain. Before Ray could even think about his next move, Jason had swept his legs out from under him. Ray hit the concrete floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. He tried to get up, but Jason already had him in a hold that made movement impossible without causing serious pain. How? Ray gasped, shocked by how quickly it had happened. 20 years of martial arts training, Jason replied matter-of-factly. And unlike the movies, I don't need to make the fights look good for the camera. Ray stopped struggling. There was no point. In movies, the bad guys always got at least a few good punches in before losing. Real life wasn't so generous. Jason kept Ray pinned with one arm while he reached for Martha's scattered belongings with his free hand. He carefully collected the wallet, the prayer book, and most importantly, the gold locket that had fallen open to reveal the photo of an elderly man with kind eyes. "This is what you were willing to hurt someone for?" Jason asked, holding up the locket. "This probably means the world to her and next to nothing on the street." Ray said nothing, but for the first time since the chase began, he felt something worse than fear, shame. Jason kept a firm grip on Ray's arm as he marched him back through the shopping center. A small crowd had gathered, many people with phones out, recording everything. News traveled fast, especially when it involved a famous action star making a real-life citizen's arrest. "Is that Jason Statham? What's happening? Did he catch a criminal?" The whispers followed them as Jason guided Ray toward the mall security office. 2 guards in uniforms rushed forward, eyes wide with surprise when they recognized who was approaching them. "This man stole a handbag from an elderly woman at the subway station," Jason explained calmly. "She's still down there, probably very upset. I've recovered her belongings." He handed Martha's bag to one of the guards. The security team took over, sitting Ray down in their office while they called the police. Jason gave a brief statement explaining what he had witnessed. He didn't make a big deal about who he was, just focused on the facts of what had happened. "Will you press charges?" one of the officers asked when they arrived. "It's not up to me," Jason replied. "The victim should decide. Speaking of which, I need to return her property." With the police handling Ray, Jason headed back to the subway station, Martha's bag safely in hand. The contents were all there: the wallet with her ID and pension money, the prayer book, and most importantly, the gold locket with her husband's photo. The station was still crowded, but word had spread about what happened. People moved aside respectfully as Jason made his way to the platform where he had last seen Martha. She wasn't there anymore. A transit officer directed him to a small bench near the station manager's office. There sat Martha, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. A female transit worker sat beside her, offering comfort. "Everything will be okay, ma'am. We've got cameras everywhere. They'll find the person who did this." Martha nodded absently, looking lost and small. The loss of her bag seemed to have taken something out of her, a sense of security, perhaps, or the belief that the world was still a decent place. Jason approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. The transit worker recognized him immediately, her eyes widening in surprise, but she said nothing. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jason said gently, kneeling down to be at eye level with Martha. "I believe this belongs to you." He held out the handbag, and Martha stared at it in disbelief. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, checking quickly inside to make sure her treasures were still there. When she saw the locket, she let out a small sob of relief. "Everything's there," Jason assured her. "The police have the man who took it. He won't be bothering anyone for a while." Martha looked up, truly seeing him for the first time. Her eyes widened with recognition. You're that action movie fellow. My grandson Tommy talks about your films all the time." She clutched her recovered bag to her chest. "You did this for me? You got my bag back." Jason smiled warmly. It was the right thing to do. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Jason looked uncomfortable with the attention, raising a hand to quiet them down. Please, no need for that. Anyone would have done the same. But everyone there knew that wasn't true. Dozens of people had seen Martha's bag being stolen, and only one had stepped up to help. The transit officer was taking notes on what happened, and Martha insisted on telling the whole story herself, gaining strength and animation as she spoke. He moved like lightning, she told the officer, glancing at Jason with admiration. Faster than those young police officers on TV shows. Jason helped Martha check that everything in her bag was intact. He was especially gentle when handling the gold locket, noticing how Martha's fingers lingered on the photo inside. "Your husband?" he asked softly. Martha nodded. 52 years together before cancer took him. "This locket is how I keep him with me." She looked up at Jason with tears in her eyes, but she was smiling now. "Thank you. Some things can't be replaced, you know." Jason nodded. He did know. In a world obsessed with the new and the expensive, it was the irreplaceable things, the things with meaning, that mattered most. "Let me help you get home," he offered, surprising himself. But something about Martha reminded him of his own grandmother back in England. "It's been quite a day for you." Martha's face lit up. "My sister will never believe who's bringing me home for tea." The next morning, Martha's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her sister called first, then her neighbors, then her grandson Tommy. Everyone had seen the news. The story was everywhere, on TV, in newspapers, all over the internet. Action star takes real-life action. Jason Statham thwarts subway thief, read the headline on the morning paper. Martha sat in her small kitchen, sipping tea and feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the attention. Her cat Pepper curled up on her lap, purring loudly as she stroked his orange fur. The events of yesterday still felt like a dream. After helping her get home, Jason had been so kind, carrying her groceries and even fixing the wobbly leg on her kitchen table. He didn't act like a famous movie star at all, just a decent man who'd done the right thing. Before leaving, he'd written his phone number on a slip of paper. "If you ever need anything, Martha, you call me," he'd said. "I mean it." She hadn't believed him, of course. Famous people said nice things all the time without meaning them. But this morning, he'd called to check on her. They'd talked for nearly 15 minutes, and he'd seemed genuinely concerned about how she was feeling. When Tommy came over later that day, he brought every Jason Statham movie he owned, spreading the DVD cases across her coffee table. "Grandma, you have to tell me everything," Tommy exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. At 14, he was at that age where he thought action stars were the coolest people on the planet. Was he just like in the movies? Did he do any crazy moves? Martha laughed. He was much kinder than in his movies, and he didn't jump off any buildings or crash any cars. He just helped an old lady who needed it. That seemed to disappoint Tommy a little, but he brightened when Martha showed him the selfie they had taken together. Jason's arm was around her shoulders, and they were both smiling. Tommy immediately posted it on his social media accounts, making Martha suddenly famous among his friends. Meanwhile, across town, Ray sat in a holding cell waiting for his court appearance. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Dozens of witnesses, security footage, and of course, Jason Statham's testimony. What made it worse was that the police had connected him to 3 other similar thefts targeting elderly people in the subway system. Ray stared at the grey wall, thinking about the choices that had led him here. He remembered the look on Martha's face when she realized her bag was gone, and for the first time, he truly understood the impact of what he'd done. It wasn't just about taking money or valuables. He'd stolen people's sense of safety, their treasured memories, their dignity. The court was likely to show little mercy. With his prior record, he was facing serious time. The thought terrified him. What Ray didn't know was that, across town, Jason Statham was sitting in his hotel suite, thinking about him too. The actor had seen something in Ray's eyes in that service corridor, not just fear or defiance, but desperation. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it helped explain it. After some research and a few phone calls, Jason discovered that Ray had once been a hard worker with a clean record before a series of misfortunes had sent his life spiraling downward. Job loss, medical bills, bad decisions, the familiar path that led many people to desperation. 2 weeks later, Martha was surprised to receive an invitation to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. When she arrived, dressed in her best outfit, the blue dress she saved for special occasions, she found not just Jason waiting for her, but her entire family, her sister, her 3 nieces, and Tommy, who looked ready to explode with excitement. "What's all this about?" she asked, confused by the gathering. Jason pulled out a chair for her. "I wanted to tell you something, and I thought your family should be here too." Once everyone was seated, Jason explained that he had set up a trust fund for Martha. It wasn't an enormous amount, but it was enough to ensure she would never have to worry about money again. Her medical expenses, housing costs, and even some extras would be covered. "You don't have to do this," Martha protested, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I know," Jason replied simply. "I want to." But that wasn't all. Jason had also been working with his lawyers and a rehabilitation program to offer Ray an alternative to lengthy prison time. If the court agreed, Ray would serve a shorter sentence followed by community service working with elderly people, helping them with home repairs, grocery shopping, and other needs. The program was designed to help him understand the impact of his actions while giving him a path to rebuild his life. "Why would you help him?" Tommy asked, confused. "He's the bad guy." Jason shook his head. "In my movies, there are bad guys and good guys. Real life isn't so simple. Sometimes good people make terrible mistakes, and they deserve a chance to make things right." Martha reached across the table and squeezed Jason's hand. "That's what makes you a real hero, young man. Not the fighting or the chasing, but seeing the good in people, even when they can't see it themselves." Jason never mentioned the incident in interviews, despite reporters constantly asking about it. But he did incorporate elements of it into his next film role, not the action sequence, but the humanity of it. The movie featured a scene where his character helps an elderly woman find her lost dog, a small moment that critics called surprisingly touching. As for Martha, she now tells the story to anyone who will listen at her senior center. She no longer takes the subway alone, not because she's afraid, but because she's usually too busy with her new role as a volunteer advocate for elderly safety programs. Sometimes, when she's speaking to groups, she holds up her gold locket and says, "Remember, it's not the value of what we carry that matters. It's the memories they hold." And in her wallet, right next to the photo of her late husband, she keeps the selfie with Jason Statham, 2 unlikely friends brought together by a moment that changed both their lives.